This ticket is fake. You're not going anywhere. Fake? This is official. Secret Service, step away from him now.
The gate agent's voice, sharp and laced with disdain, sliced through the terminal's low hum. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. This ticket is a fake. Every head in the boarding area for Global Alliance Airways Flight 88 to Geneva turned to stare. They saw the agent Sylvia Jenkins pointing a perfectly manicured finger at a calm, well-dressed black man. He stood there holding a first-class ticket, his expression unreadable. She mocked him, her voice rising for all to hear, enjoying the power of her public humiliation. What she didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that this man was more than just a passenger. And in just a few minutes, two men in dark suits would walk in, and her entire world was about to be dismantled, piece by humiliating piece. Dr. Marco Bellamy was a man who understood the intricate dance of quiet power. He didn't wear flashy suits or expensive watches. His attire was a simple, well-tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt and a muted grey tie. At 42, his face was one of calm intelligence, his eyes observant, missing nothing. He travelled light, a single leather briefcase containing a secured laptop and a slim portfolio of documents that could, in the wrong hands, destabilize a small nation's economy. His currency was not wealth, but information and influence assets he wielded with surgical precision within the hallowed halls of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Today, he was simply a man trying to board a plane at New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. Terminal 4 was its usual chaotic self, a swirling vortex of languages, emotions, and the relentless rumble of rolling suitcases. Marco found a quiet corner near gate B32, sipped a bottle of water, and reviewed his notes one last time. The upcoming G7 special session in Geneva was critical. He was the lead strategist on a new multinational initiative to combat sophisticated cyber-terrorism networks that were using cryptocurrency to fund their operations. The work was sensitive, the travel discreet. His booking was intentionally low-profile, a ghost in the commercial system, arranged through government channels. When the boarding call for first-class passengers echoed through the hall, Marco slipped his portfolio into his briefcase, snapped it shut, and joined the short line. He was the third person to approach the gate podium. In front of him, a couple was greeted with beaming smiles and cheerful wishes for a pleasant flight. Then it was his turn. He handed his passport and boarding pass to the gate agent. Her name tag read Sylvia. Sylvia Jenkins considered herself the guardian of Gate B32. She saw her job not as customer service, but as frontline security. She had a sixth sense, she believed, for trouble. She saw fraud where there was none, and suspicion was her default setting. When Marco Bellamy, a black man in a simple suit, handed her a first-class ticket, her internal alarms, colored by years of unexamined prejudice, began to chime. She took the boarding pass. The cardstock felt slightly different. The font, to her untrained eye, looked a fraction of a point off. She scanned it. A sharp negative beep blared from the machine, accompanied by a red error message on her screen. Passenger record not found. Sylvia looked up, a triumphant smirk already forming on her lips. This was her moment. She had caught one. "Sir, there seems to be a problem," she said, her voice unnecessarily loud. Marco remained placid. This happened occasionally with his travel arrangements. "I'm sure it's a simple matter. Could you perhaps try the reservation code manually? It's a government booking. Sometimes they don't sync correctly with the commercial system." He spoke calmly, offering a logical solution. Sylvia ignored his suggestion completely. She held the ticket between her thumb and forefinger as if it were a piece of garbage. A government booking right. The sarcasm was thick enough to taste. She tapped her screen with a long acrylic nail. "There is no record of you, Mr. Bellamy," she said, mispronouncing his name deliberately, "on this flight. Not in first class, not in coach, not anywhere." Marco's expression didn't change, but a familiar weariness settled in his chest. He knew this dance all too well. It was the dance of being questioned, of being doubted, of having to prove his legitimacy in a world that often assumed the opposite. "I can assure you the ticket is valid," he said, his tone still even. "I was checked in this morning. My baggage is on the plane." "Lots of people say their baggage is on the plane," Sylvia retorted, her voice rising in pitch and volume. She was now performing for the growing audience of passengers in the queue behind him. She leaned into her microphone, and her next words boomed through the gate area's speakers. "Attention passengers, we have a slight delay in boarding due to a security issue at the gate. We appreciate your patience." Marco watched as dozens of faces turned toward him. He could see the mix of curiosity, annoyance, and suspicion in their eyes. He was now the security issue. He had been reduced from a respected government advisor to a potential criminal in the span of 30 seconds, all because of a woman who had already tried and convicted him in her mind. Sylvia looked at him, her eyes narrowed with a self-satisfied gleam. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. This ticket is a fake." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The word fake echoed in the sudden silence. Marco felt the familiar sting of humiliation, a hot poker against his skin. But years of navigating treacherous political landscapes had taught him one thing: never let them see you break. He simply gave a slow, deliberate nod. "As you wish," he said, his voice a low, steady murmur against the storm of her making. "But I think you're going to find you've made a significant error." Sylvia just scoffed, picking up her phone to call for a supervisor, already relishing the story she would tell in the break room later. She had no idea that the error was not his, but hers, and its consequences would be more devastating than she could ever imagine. Sylvia Jenkins was on a power trip, and Dr. Marco Bellamy was her unwilling passenger. With every passing second, she amplified the drama, casting herself as the vigilant hero and him as the con artist. "Sir, I need you to move away from the podium." "Now," she commanded, pointing to a stark, empty section of wall beside a bank of payphones that hadn't been used in a decade. It was a place for people to be put on display, a corner of shame. Marco complied without a word, moving to the designated spot. He stood straight, his briefcase held firmly in one hand. He could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on him. He saw parents pulling their children a little closer, businessmen in expensive suits whispering to one another, their gazes flicking between him and the gate agent. He had become a spectacle, the villain in a play he never auditioned for. His mind, a finely tuned instrument for geopolitical strategy, was now racing through a different set of calculations. Option A, escalate. Raise his voice demand to see a senior manager flash the government credentials he kept in an interior pocket. But that would create a scene drawing the very attention his mission was designed to avoid. It would be messy and unprofessional. Option B, comply and wait. Allow the system to work, however flawed and biased it might be. This was the path of patience, the one he had been forced to walk countless times before. It was infuriating, but it was strategic. He chose option B. Sylvia, meanwhile, was holding court. "I just don't understand why people try these things," she said loudly to her colleague at the adjacent gate, ensuring her voice carried. "A first-class ticket to Geneva. Did he really think we wouldn't notice?" The nerve of some people. Her colleague, a younger man named Kevin, looked uncomfortable. He glanced at Marco, who stood impassively against the wall, and then back at Sylvia. Maybe it's just a system glitch, Bren. It happens. Not like this, Sylvia snapped, cutting him off. I know a fake when I see one. I've been doing this for 12 years. You develop an eye for it. Her eye was an unsubtle cocktail of prejudice and confirmation bias. The supervisor, a portly, perpetually stressed man named David Henderson, arrived a few minutes later, striding toward the gate with an air of immense self-importance. He was a man who managed by the book, and his book had no chapters on nuance or empathy. "What's the situation, Jenkins?" he asked, not even bothering to look at Marco. "I caught one, Mr. Henderson," Sylvia announced, proudly puffing out her chest. "This man," she said, gesturing dramatically, "tried to board with a fraudulent first-class ticket. It's a complete forgery, no record in the system. When I called him on it, he started giving me some story about a government booking." She used air quotes, her voice dripping with mockery. Henderson finally turned his gaze on Marco. He scanned him from head to toe, the simple suit, the calm demeanor, the black skin, and his mind was made up. He saw exactly what Sylvia wanted him to see. "Right," Henderson grunted. He walked over to Marco, standing uncomfortably close, an unsubtle act of intimidation. "Sir, I'm the station supervisor. We have a zero-tolerance policy for fraudulent travel documents. It's a federal offense." "My travel documents are not fraudulent," Marco stated, his voice as level as a sheet of ice. "My name is Dr. Marco Bellamy. I am a senior advisor with the Department of the Treasury. If you would simply contact your airline's corporate liaison for government travel, this can be cleared up in 5 minutes." Henderson let out a short, barking laugh. "The Treasury. Is that what we're going with today? Sir, I've heard it all. I've had people tell me they're secret agents, diplomats, the King of Sheba. It doesn't work. The public degradation was now complete. He wasn't just a suspected fraud, he was being painted as a delusional liar. The line of passengers, their boarding process now completely halted, were getting restless. The whispers grew louder. "Why don't they just call the police?" one woman muttered. "He looks so calm, it's creepy," another said. Sylvia, hearing this, felt emboldened. "Mr. Henderson, he's holding up the entire flight. We're going to miss our departure slot." "He's not getting on this flight," Henderson declared, turning his back on Marco to address Sylvia as if Marco was no longer part of the conversation. "Here's what we'll do. We're going to call Port Authority Police. They can sort him out. And I want you to file a report. Make sure you note his refusal to cooperate." "I have not refused to cooperate." Marco's voice cut through their plotting. It was still quiet, yet it carried an authority that made both of them flinch. "I have offered a simple, verifiable solution. You have refused to listen." Henderson whirled around his face, reddening. "You don't get to tell me how to do my job. You are being denied boarding. Your ticket, which is likely stolen or fake, is void. Now, if you don't leave the gate area immediately, I will have you removed for trespassing." This was the final escalation. They were threatening him with arrest. Marco looked at Henderson's puffed-up chest and Sylvia's smug expression. He saw the grim satisfaction in their eyes. They were enjoying this. They were feasting on his humiliation. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He had given them their chance to de-escalate, to choose reason over prejudice. They had refused. The time for option B was over. Without another word, Marco reached into his suit jacket. Sylvia tensed, and Henderson took a half-step back, a flicker of fear in his eyes. But Marco didn't pull out a weapon or a fake badge. He pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts to a single secure number, marked only with the letter C. He pressed the call button and held the phone to his ear. It rang once. "This is Bellamy," he said into the phone, his voice low and devoid of emotion. We have a situation at JFK Terminal 4, Gate B32. Global Alliance Airways. Active interference with federal transport. I'm going to need an escort." He listened for a moment. "Yes," he said. "That would be appropriate. 5 minutes." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked at Sylvia and Henderson, who were staring at him with a mixture of confusion and contempt. "Who was that your imaginary friend from the Treasury?" Sylvia sneered. Marco didn't answer. He simply straightened his tie and resumed his vigil against the wall, his gaze fixed on the entrance to the concourse. He knew exactly who was coming, and he knew that for Sylvia Jenkins and David Henderson, the curtain was about to fall on their little theatre of cruelty. For the next 5 minutes, the air at Gate B32 was thick with a tense, suffocating silence, broken only by the distant, garbled announcements for other flights. The passengers of Flight 88 were now openly staring their travel anxieties, replaced by a morbid curiosity. Sylvia Jenkins stood behind her podium, arms crossed, radiating a smug confidence. She occasionally glanced at Marco, a triumphant sneer playing on her lips, as if she had just single-handedly thwarted an international crime syndicate. David Henderson, the supervisor, was busy on his radio, his voice a low, officious drone. "Yeah, I've got a situation here at B32. Unruly passenger, fraudulent documents. I've denied him boarding, just waiting on Port Authority to come and give him a new place to sleep tonight." He chuckled at his own joke. Marco remained perfectly still. His placidity was no longer just a strategy. It was a shield. Inside, a cold anger was churning. It wasn't the personal insult that bothered him most. He had faced far worse from far more powerful men in closed-door meetings in Washington and Brussels. It was the sheer unadulterated arrogance of it all, the casual cruelty. The way Sylvia and Henderson had so eagerly leapt to the worst possible conclusion, fueled by a prejudice so deeply ingrained they probably weren't even aware of it. They weren't just doing their jobs poorly. They were abusing the sliver of authority they had been given, and they were delighting in it. He thought about the documents in his briefcase. They contained analyses and projections that would directly impact the global fight against terror financing. The meeting in Geneva wasn't just another conference. It was a crucial step in safeguarding the world's financial systems. And here he was, being held up by two petty tyrants in a provincial power play. The irony was galling. His phone call had not been to a colleague. The number, encrypted and routed through a secure government server, went directly to the command desk of the United States Secret Service's New York field office. His travel, due to its sensitive nature, was flagged. He was under a form of passive remote protection, what they called Level 3 Overwatch. He had the authority to elevate that to an active response if he deemed his mission was in jeopardy, and being threatened with arrest by a belligerent airline supervisor certainly qualified. He had simply said, "active interference with federal transport." It was a coded phrase, a specific trigger. It didn't just mean he was having trouble boarding a plane. It meant a federal official on official, time-sensitive government business was being unlawfully obstructed. It was a phrase that launched a very specific, very serious protocol. Sylvia grew impatient. "Where are the cops?" she muttered to Henderson. And who was he on the phone with? Probably his lawyer getting ready to sue us for being mean to him. She laughed. "Let him try," Henderson scoffed. "We have it all on camera. He presented a fake ticket. End of story. He'll be lucky to avoid jail time, let alone get a payout." As if on cue, two figures appeared at the far end of the concourse. They were not Port Authority officers in their familiar blue uniforms. These men wore impeccably tailored identical dark navy suits, white shirts and black ties. They wore no visible insignias, no badges, no guns on their hips. They didn't need to. Their authority was woven into the very fabric of their presence. They moved with a fluid, synchronized economy of motion, their eyes constantly scanning, assessing every person, every angle, every potential threat. They were not walking. They were flowing through the crowd. People instinctively parted ways for them, a subconscious recognition of apex predators entering the ecosystem. The low buzz of the terminal seemed to dip as they approached gate B32. Sylvia saw them first. Her smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. They didn't look like port authority. They looked like something out of a movie. "Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice a little less certain now. "Who are they?" Henderson turned. He saw the two men, their gazes locked onto the gate area. His first thought was that they were federal agents, perhaps FBI or Homeland Security, responding to his call about a fraudulent document, taking it more seriously than he'd expected. A thrill of validation shot through him. This was going to look great on his performance review. He had not just handled a problem, he had uncovered a potential federal case. He puffed out his chest and took a step forward, ready to greet them and present his suspect. "Right this way, gentlemen." He began, a self-important smile spreading across his face. "I'm David Henderson, the station supervisor. I've got the situation under control. The individual you're here for is right over." He stopped mid-sentence. The two agents didn't even glance at him. Their eyes went right past him, past Sylvia, and settled directly on the calm, composed man standing against the wall. The lead agent, a tall man with sharp features and cold, analytical eyes, gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a greeting. It was an acknowledgement. He spoke, and his voice was not loud, but it cut through the air with the chilling finality of a judge's gavel. "Dr. Bellamy," he said. "Agent Price, this is Agent Davies. We apologize for the delay. We're here to facilitate your departure." The entire gate area fell into a state of suspended animation. Sylvia's jaw literally dropped. Henderson's face went from ruddy confidence to a pale, slack-jawed confusion. The suspect, the fraud, the unruly passenger they had been publicly humiliating for the last 15 minutes was being addressed with a title and a level of deference that was utterly incomprehensible to them. Agent Price's gaze then shifted, moving from Marco to Henderson, and finally landing on Sylvia. The cold, analytical look was gone, replaced by something far more unsettling. It was a look of profound disappointment and impending consequence. "Who?" Agent Price asked, his voice, dropping a full octave, "is in charge here, Twice." The storm had arrived, and Sylvia Jenkins and David Henderson were standing directly in the eye of it, utterly exposed and unprepared for the deluge that was about to wash their careers away. The question hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "Who is in charge here?" David Henderson, his mind still struggling to process the seismic shift in the situation, automatically raised his hand like a schoolboy. I am," he stammered. "I'm the station supervisor, David Henderson. There's been a misunderstanding. This man—" "Stop talking," Agent Davies, the second agent, said. His voice was quieter than Price's, but it had the sharp, dangerous edge of a stiletto. Henderson's mouth snapped shut. Agent Price never took his eyes off Sylvia. "You," he said, his voice low and controlled. "You are the gate agent who denied him boarding." Sylvia, who just minutes before had been the queen of her small kingdom, now looked like a cornered animal. The smugness had evaporated, replaced by a growing panic. "The ticket wouldn't scan," she said, her voice a weak, defensive squeak. "The system said, 'Record not found.' I was following protocol." "Protocol," Agent Price repeated the word, as if it were a foreign object in his mouth. Does your protocol involve publicly accusing a passenger of fraud? Does it involve broadcasting a security issue over the public address system? Does it involve calling a United States Treasury advisor a liar? Each question was a hammer blow dismantling Sylvia's paper-thin defenses. Her face, which had been flushed with righteous indignation, was now draining of all color. I didn't know who he was. That Agent Price said, taking a deliberate step closer to the podium, is precisely the point. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You didn't seek to verify. You saw a black man with a first-class ticket, you made an assumption, and you built a fantasy of criminality around it to make yourself feel important. You didn't follow protocol. You indulged a prejudice. The passengers who had been watching this unfold with rapt attention began to murmur. The narrative had flipped so violently it was giving them whiplash. The man they had been led to believe was a criminal was now being defended by men who looked like they could shut down the entire airport with a single phone call. The real culprits, it seemed, were the airline staff. Marco Bellamy, who had remained silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke. He pushed himself off the wall and walked calmly toward the agents. "Agents," he said, his tone one of weary command. "The delay is becoming problematic. The flight needs to depart." "Of course, Dr. Bellamy," Agent Davies replied instantly, turning to him with an attitude of complete deference. "We just need to resolve the obstruction." He then turned his attention back to Henderson. "Mr. Henderson, you threatened to have Dr. Bellamy arrested. On what grounds?" Henderson was sweating profusely, his uniform collar suddenly feeling 2 sizes too small. His ticket was fraudulent. I had reason to believe. "You had an error message on a screen," Agent Price cut him off coldly. "Dr. Bellamy's ticket is a specially issued secure government fare. It is booked through the Department of State's travel annex and routed via a protected channel. It is designed specifically not to appear in your standard commercial reservation system for security reasons. Any competent supervisor, when presented with this situation and the passenger's explanation, would have a simple next step: escalate to your corporate security or government travel liaison. Instead, you chose to escalate to public humiliation and threats. You chose poorly." Agent Price then looked at Marco's boarding pass, still clutched in Sylvia's trembling hand. "Give it to me," he said. It was not a request. Sylvia fumbled with the ticket, her fingers clumsy, and handed it over. Price didn't even look at it. He handed it to Marco. "Dr. Bellamy, your boarding pass." He then pulled out his own credentials, a slim leather wallet containing the unmistakable gold and blue shield of the United States Secret Service. He didn't flash it. He held it open for Henderson and Sylvia to see clearly. "Dr. Marco Bellamy is traveling on a diplomatic passport under the authority of the Secretary of the Treasury. He is the United States' lead delegate for an urgent G7 National Security Summit in Geneva. His travel is considered an act of state. When you unlawfully interfered with his ability to board this aircraft, you weren't just providing poor customer service. You were obstructing a federal officer in the performance of his duties and actively interfering with the national security interests of the United States." A collective gasp went through the crowd. This was no longer about a fake ticket. It was about national security. The stakes had been raised to a level that was terrifyingly out of Henderson and Sylvia's league. Sylvia looked as though she was about to faint. Her entire reality had been shattered. The man she had mocked, the man she had gleefully tried to have arrested, was not just some random person. He was in the cold calculus of the federal government, infinitely more important than her. Henderson, for his part, was desperately trying to salvage his career, which he could now feel crumbling into dust. "I apologize," he said, directing his words to Marco. We We were misinformed. It was a mistake. A regrettable mistake. Marco looked at him, his expression unreadable. A mistake is a typo, he said, his voice quiet, yet carrying across the now silent gate. What you did was a choice. You chose to assume the worst. You chose to humiliate rather than investigate. You chose to wield your small power as a weapon. This wasn't a mistake. It was an abuse. Agent Price gestured toward the jet bridge. Dr. Bellamy, we should get you on board. We've already spoken to the captain. He's holding the plane for you. As Marco began to walk toward the entrance, Agent Davies stepped in front of a sputtering Henderson. You two, he said, indicating both Henderson and Sylvia, are not going anywhere. The Global Alliance Airways VP of North American Operations is on his way down here. So is the head of airport security. I suggest you start thinking about what you're going to put in your official statements. I assure you, we will be reading them very carefully. The finality in his tone was absolute. As Dr. Marco Bellamy walked down the jet bridge, leaving the scene of his humiliation, behind the air filled not with the sound of an airplane preparing for departure, but with the deafening silence of two careers coming to a sudden, spectacular, and brutal end. As Dr. Bellamy disappeared down the jet bridge, the invisible shield of his presence vanished, leaving Sylvia Jenkins and David Henderson exposed to the full frigid fallout of their actions. The atmosphere at the gate, already tense, curdled into one of grim inevitability. Agent Price and Agent Davies stood like statues, their impassive expressions promising a swift and merciless reckoning. The passengers of Flight 88 were still there watching. This was better than any in-flight movie. They were witnessing a live-action morality play about hubris and comeuppance. The whispers among them were no longer of suspicion towards Marco, but of condemnation for the two employees who had so spectacularly self-destructed. Within 3 minutes, a new set of figures arrived, this time from the direction of the airport's executive offices. The first man was Robert Peterson, the Vice President of North American Operations for Global Alliance Airways. He was a man in his late 50s, with a face that looked permanently exhausted from dealing with crises. But this was a category of crisis he had never encountered. He was flanked by two members of the airline's corporate security team and the airport's chief of security. Peterson's face was a mask of controlled fury. He had been yanked out of a quarterly budget meeting by a phone call from a very high, very angry official at the Department of State. The words "national security incident" and "unlawful obstruction" had been used. For an airline executive, these were the words of nightmares. He marched directly to Agent Price. "Agent, I'm Robert Peterson. I cannot begin to express my apologies for this catastrophic failure on our part." "Your apologies are noted, Mr. Peterson," Agent Price said coolly. "Dr. Bellamy is on the plane. The immediate objective has been achieved. The secondary objective is ensuring this never happens again." His eyes flickered toward Sylvia and Henderson. "These are your employees." Peterson's gaze fell upon his two staff members, as if he were looking at something he had just scraped off his shoe. "Yes, David Henderson, station supervisor. Sylvia Jenkins, gate agent." He turned to Henderson, his voice low and seething with rage. "David, I want your ID! Your pass, your radio. Now!" Henderson's face crumpled. The last vestiges of his authority were being stripped from him in front of his colleagues and 100 passengers. "Mr. Peterson, please, I can explain. It was a misunderstanding. The system..." Peterson's voice rose, cracking like a whip. "The system is not the issue. Here, David judgment is the issue. Discretion is the issue. I have the United States Secret Service in my terminal because you and your agent decided to play judge and jury with a passenger who, it turns out, is more important to the functioning of the US government than you, me, and this entire goddamn airline combined. Now give me your ID." Shaking Henderson fumbled with the lanyard around his neck, unclipped his airport credentials, and handed them over. He also placed his radio on the counter. His career as a supervisor was over. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Peterson then turned to Sylvia. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face, carving paths through her makeup. It was not the cry of remorse, but the cry of someone who had been caught. "Ms. Jenkins," Peterson said, his voice laced with ice. "Your behavior, as it was described to me by the State Department and corroborated by the agents here, was not just unprofessional. It was reckless. It was malicious. You did not seek to solve a problem. You sought to create a spectacle. You used our company's resources to publicly harass a man for your own gratification." "It wasn't like that," she sobbed. "I thought the ticket was fake. I was trying to protect the company." "You protect this company by treating every single passenger with dignity and respect," Peterson shot back. "You protect this company by following procedures that include discreetly verifying irregularities, not screaming, 'fake ticket' in a crowded terminal. You have exposed Global Alliance Airways to a level of liability and political damage that I can't even begin to calculate. You are suspended effective immediately. A member of our HR team will escort you from the premises. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch anything. Just leave." The airline's corporate security guards stepped forward, positioning themselves on either side of Sylvia. She looked around desperately, as if searching for an ally, but found only the cold, judgmental stares of her former audience. Her colleague Kevin from the next gate quickly looked away, busying himself with his computer. No one wanted to be associated with her. The karma was swift, brutal, and utterly uncompromising. Sylvia Jenkins had built her sense of self-worth on the small power of her uniform and her position. In the space of 20 minutes, she had been stripped of it all. She had wanted an audience for her moment of triumph, and now she had one for her moment of utter disgrace. Led away by the security guards, she was no longer the guardian of the gate. She was just another person being escorted out of an airport, her career in ruins. Henderson was told to wait for HR in a back office. His demotion, he knew, was just the first step. He would likely be shuffled into a dead-end administrative role with no public contact before being quietly forced into early retirement. His days of managing anything were over. With the immediate problem dealt with, Agent Price addressed Peterson. "Dr. Bellamy does not wish for this incident to become a public affair, Mr. Peterson. However, the Treasury Department will be lodging a formal complaint. They will expect a full report on your remedial actions. And we," he said, gesturing to himself and Agent Davies, "will be filing our own report on the obstruction of a federal official. This is not over." Peterson nodded grimly. "I understand completely. We will cooperate in any way necessary. We will make this right." "See that you do," Agent Price said. With that, he and Agent Davies gave a curt nod and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as they had appeared, their mission complete. The storm had passed, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 careers and a powerful unspoken warning. The hierarchy of the world was vast and complex, and sometimes the quietest man in the room was the one you could least afford to cross. Aboard Global Alliance Airways Flight 88, the atmosphere was thick with the aftermath of the drama. The flight attendants who had been briefed by the captain treated Dr. Marco Bellamy with a level of reverence usually reserved for royalty. He was offered champagne, the chef's personal recommendations, and an endless supply of apologies. Marco accepted them with quiet grace. He wasn't interested in being pampered. He settled into his spacious first-class seat, opened his briefcase, and tried to refocus on the complex algorithms and financial data that awaited him in Geneva. but his mind kept drifting back to the gate. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction in the downfall of Sylvia Jenkins and David Henderson. What he felt was a profound and bone-deep exhaustion. It was the exhaustion of having to constantly be more composed, more articulate and more patient than anyone else in the room, just to be treated with a baseline level of respect. It was the weariness of knowing that his credentials, his education, and his contributions to his country could all be instantly erased by the color of his skin in the eyes of someone with a little bit of power and a lot of prejudice. When Robert Peterson, the airline VP, came aboard just before the cabin door was sealed, Marco was not surprised. Peterson approached his seat with a look of deep contrition. "Dr. Bellamy," he began, his voice low, "on behalf of the entire airline from our CEO down, I want to offer you our most sincere and humble apology. What happened back there was inexcusable. It is not who we are, and I promise you, we will take every measure to ensure it never happens again." Marco looked up from his papers and met the man's eyes. "I appreciate you coming to say that, Mr. Peterson." "We've taken immediate action," Peterson continued, wanting to demonstrate his seriousness. "The agent has been suspended and will be terminated. The supervisor has been removed from his post and will face a full disciplinary review. But I know that's not enough." "No, it's not," Marco agreed, his voice even. "This wasn't about two individuals, Mr. Peterson. This was about a culture that allowed an employee to feel comfortable enough to publicly humiliate a customer based on a biased assumption, and a system that allowed a manager to endorse and escalate that behavior instead of investigating the facts. Firing them is treating the symptom. I'm interested in the cure." Peterson was taken aback by the directness, the strategic thinking. This was clearly not a man interested in a settlement or a voucher for a free flight. "What would you suggest?" Peterson asked, genuinely seeking an answer. "Training," Marco said simply. "Real training. Not just the online modules your employees click through once a year. I'm talking about intensive scenario-based training on de-escalation, implicit bias, and cultural sensitivity. Bring in experts. Make it mandatory. Make passing it a condition of employment for every single customer-facing employee from the ticket counter to the executive suite." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "And I want your company to make a public commitment to it. Not a press release full of corporate jargon, but a real plan of action. That's how you make it right. You change the culture so that the next Dr. Bellamy, who might not have a direct line to the Secret Service, doesn't have to endure what I did today." Peterson was silent for a long moment, absorbing the directive. It was more than he had expected, but he also recognized the wisdom in it. It was a path to redemption, not just for the airline's reputation, but for its very soul. "It will be done," Peterson said finally, his voice firm with new resolve. "We will do it. I give you my personal word." "Thank you," Marco said, giving a slight nod. And with that, the conversation was over. Peterson departed, and a few moments later, the plane finally pushed back from the gate, soaring into the evening sky toward Europe. The story, however, did not end there. While Marco Bellamy was in Geneva negotiating the finer points of global cybersecurity, the ripple effect of his stand at Gate B32 was spreading. The internal report filed by the Secret Service landed on some very important desks in Washington, D.C. The Treasury Department's formal complaint to Global Alliance Airways was scathing. Sylvia Jenkins was fired within 48 hours. She threatened a wrongful termination lawsuit, but when presented with the mountain of evidence against her CCTV footage, multiple witness statements from passengers, and the official report from the Secret Service, her lawyer advised her to walk away with nothing. She disappeared into obscurity, her 12 years of service culminating in a single career-ending act of bigotry. David Henderson was demoted to a windowless office in the airline's cargo division, tasked with processing lost baggage claims. The humiliation of the fall was a daily punishment. He resigned 6 months later. But Marco's true victory was systemic. True to his word, Robert Peterson, with the full backing of his CEO, launched the most comprehensive corporate cultural retraining program the airline industry had ever seen. They hired a leading consulting firm specializing in diversity and inclusion. They developed a new set of protocols for handling ticket and documentation irregularities, a system that prioritized customer dignity and discreet verification above all else. Internally, it became known as the Bellamy Protocol. The story of what happened at Gate B32 became a mandatory case study for all new and existing employees, a stark lesson in the abuse of power and the importance of professional humility. Global Alliance Airways never publicly acknowledged the specific incident, but 6 months later, their CEO gave a widely reported speech at an industry conference about their new Dignity First initiative, detailing the millions they were investing in customer service and implicit bias training. Their customer satisfaction scores, which had been stagnant for years, began to climb. The karma that hit Sylvia Jenkins and David Henderson was not a lightning strike, but a slow, grinding machine of consequences they had set in motion themselves. For Marco Bellamy, justice wasn't the punishment of 2 people, but the reform of an entire system, ensuring that countless others would never have to stand against a wall of shame, waiting for a rescue that might never come. 2 years felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye. The world had kept spinning, and Dr. Marco Bellamy had spun with it. The Geneva Initiative, born from the documents in his briefcase on that fateful day, had become a landmark success. Its intricate web of financial tracking algorithms and international cooperation had systematically choked off funding to a dozen extremist networks. He was now at the forefront of his field, his counsel sought by governments and financial institutions across the globe. His work was his fortress, a place of logic, order, and tangible results. Yet the past is a stubborn ghost. It doesn't haunt the grand halls of power or the sterile meeting rooms. It waits in the liminal spaces, the corridors of transit, the anonymous queues of modern life. London's Heathrow Airport was a symphony of controlled chaos, a far more polished and subdued environment than the brash energy of JFK. But to Marco, all airports now carried a faint, dissonant note of caution. He was flying home once again on Global Alliance Airways. His choice was deliberate. For 2 years he had read their quarterly reports on the Dignity First initiative. He had seen their press releases. He wanted to see for himself if the change was real or if it was merely a cosmetic fix, a layer of corporate paint over the same rotten wood. As he approached the gleaming first-class check-in counter, he felt an involuntary tightening in his chest. It was a muscle memory of humiliation, a phantom echo of 100 pairs of eyes staring at him, judging him. He saw the harsh, fluorescent lights of Gate B32, heard the phantom boom of Sylvia Jenkins's voice over the PA system. He took a slow, deep breath, anchoring himself in the present. He was not that man anymore, the one cornered against a wall. He had ensured it. He stepped forward and presented his passport and boarding pass to the young agent. She was sharp, her uniform impeccable, her smile genuine. Her name tag read Annika. She took his documents with a professional ease that was in itself a small comfort. "Good morning, sir. Traveling to New York today?" she asked, her fingers dancing across her keyboard. "That's right," Marco replied, his voice betraying none of the tension coiling in his stomach. She slid the boarding pass into the scanner. For a single heart-stopping moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then came the sound. The same sharp, discordant beep. The same angry red error message flashing on her screen, "Passenger record invalid." The sound was a physical blow. It traveled up Marco's spine, a jolt of ice and fire. His hands resting on his briefcase clenched into fists. He instinctively braced for the inevitable cascade, the change in the agent's expression, from polite to suspicious. The condescending question, the loud accusation, the call for a supervisor. He could feel the ghosts of Gate B32 rushing into the present, their cold fingers tracing his skin. He prepared himself for another battle he was so profoundly tired of fighting, but the cascade never began. Annika's smile didn't falter. She didn't look up at him with suspicion. Instead, she leaned closer to her screen, her brow furrowing for a moment, not in distrust, but in professional concentration. She tapped a few keys, bringing up a different screen. "Ah, of course," she said, a tone of recognition in her voice. She looked up at him, her expression now one of complete reassurance. "My apologies for that, sir. The system automatically flags secure government bookings for manual verification. It's what we call a Code MP alert." Marco stared at her. His mind, usually so quick, struggled to process the letters. MP. "A Code MP," he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir," she said, her tone as matter-of-fact as if she were describing the weather. "It's a Bellamy Protocol flag. It was implemented a couple of years ago to ensure that sensitive and non-standard reservations are handled with discretion and speed to protect passenger privacy. It just means I have to bypass the main system and confirm your credentials directly with our governmental liaison desk. It's no trouble at all. It's for your security." She turned to a secondary terminal, her movements efficient and practiced. "It will only take a moment." Bellamy Protocol. The words hit him with the force of a tidal wave, not of water, but of pure, unadulterated shock. It wasn't just a procedure. It had a name. It had his name. The protocol designed to prevent the very humiliation he had suffered was named after him. He felt a sudden dizziness, a sense of profound unreality. They hadn't just created a new rule. They had etched his story, his pain, into the very architecture of their operations. A piece of his trauma had been codified, transformed from a personal wound into an institutional safeguard. He watched, mesmerized, as Annika spoke quietly into her headset, confirming his details. There was no fuss, no drama, no performance for an unseen audience. It was just quiet competence. It was everything the encounter with Sylvia Jenkins was not. It was professional. It was respectful. It was normal. A few seconds later, a new boarding pass slid out of her printer. "All sorted, Dr. Bellamy," she said, handing him the new ticket and his passport. "I've taken the liberty of confirming your seat, 1A. We'll begin pre-boarding in about 40 minutes. The Polaris Lounge is just through security to your left. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do for you." "No," Marco managed to say the word, feeling heavy and inadequate. "That's everything. Thank you, Annika. You're most welcome. Have a wonderful flight." He took his documents and walked away from the counter, moving on autopilot. He didn't go towards security or the lounge. He found a vast floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the airfield and simply stood there, watching the colossal aircraft move with ponderous grace. The victory he felt wasn't the sharp, fiery satisfaction of revenge. That had faded long ago. This was something deeper, quieter, and far more resonant. It was the feeling of a circle closing, of a debt being paid, not to him, but to the future. Sylvia Jenkins and David Henderson had lost their jobs, a swift and brutal consequence. But this, the Bellamy Protocol. This was true justice. It was the assurance that the next person with a complex ticket, the next traveller who didn't fit a prejudiced profile, would be met not with suspicion, but with a polite smile and a discreet procedure. He had faced down an abuse of power, not by shouting, but by reasoning. He had demanded not an apology for himself, but an evolution of the system for everyone else. And the system had listened. It had learned. It had changed its very code, a weight he hadn't even fully realized he was carrying, the residue of that cold anger, the exhaustion of that constant vigilance, finally lifted from his shoulders. It dissolved into the vast, open sky before him. He had not just won. He had built something better from the wreckage. With a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face, Dr. Marco Bellamy turned away from the window. He straightened his tie, picked up his briefcase, and walked toward his flight, leaving the ghosts of Gate B-32, not just behind him, but transformed their haunting whispers, now a silent, coded promise of dignity for all who came after. The story of Dr. Marco Bellamy isn't just a tale of karma. It's a powerful reminder that true strength often lies not in loud confrontation, but in quiet resolve. He faced down ugly prejudice and institutional arrogance, not by lowering himself to their level, but by forcing the system to rise to his. The downfall of the agent and her supervisor was satisfying, but the real triumph was the lasting change their actions inspired. It's a testament to the idea that one person's dignity, when defended with intelligence and integrity, can become a shield for countless others. If you believe that character is what you do when no one is watching, and that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, then show your support for stories like this. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and smash that subscribe button to join our community. Have you ever witnessed a quiet hero force a powerful change? Let us know your story in the comments below. Thank you for listening.